It's not the house that's haunted. It's your son.
What's your favorite scary movie?
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Hi my spooky friends, welcome back to another episode of Slashes in Sync. I'm Marva, or Marvelous, whichever you want to call me is fine. And I'm one of two hosts of the Slashes in Sync podcast. I'm sure you guys have already noticed, MJ is not with me on this episode. Full transparency and honesty, he's just busy with work. So I'll be the one who will be talking about the movie that we watched recently, Heretic. And don't worry, MJ took the time to throw in his own thoughts into the mix of all this, so it's not going to be a one-sided review, or at least not fully. So you guys will definitely be able to hear his side of the story, or at least his side of what he thought Heretic was like. So first and foremost, this movie is produced by A24. This whole time I've been calling it A24, and I kind of feel stupid. You guys let me know if you already knew that the production company was A24, if it's A24, and I was just really late to the game. But anyway, I digress. So I'm sure you guys already know, or you may not know, who knows. The movie Heretic was released last year, and MJ and I had not watched as many horror movies released in 2024 as we'd like to admit. This was mainly due to the fact that we kind of had a very jaded view on the recent horror films being released, but that was mainly because of the titles that came out earlier of 24. So over time, we slowed down at what was recent releases, and we're going more towards talking about different franchises, established franchises, things like that. So I'm sure if you've been a long-time follower of the channel or of the account in general, you'll notice that we kind of broke away from recent releases of horror films close to June, July. So if anything, we're playing catch up. So MJ and I saw that Heretic was out on streaming services. I think it was Max. And we had heard decent things about the film, so we decided to watch it just recently, and I honestly enjoyed the film. But just like always, I'm going to go through and talk about the details of the film and all the cool little factoids that come into it. And at the very end, I'll include my final thoughts along with MJ's final thoughts. First things first, there's a lot of cool details about this movie. One of them being that Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East, the two actresses playing the Mormons, missionaries, they themselves were raised Mormon, so they were able to give valuable insight to the religion when shooting the movie. They're no longer Mormons, but I mean, they had valuable input, so they were able to kind of steer the direction of the movie in the correct way, and make sure that the religion was portrayed in Hollywood correctly. So it was pretty cool to find that out. Along the way, you hear the character Reed, played by Hugh Grant. He talks about the phrase, "with great power comes great responsibility." Paxton, who is played by Chloe East, says that the quote comes from Spider-Man, and Reed quote unquote corrects her by saying Voltaire. Paxton is actually right. So one of the missionaries is correct. We actually don't have any record of Voltaire ever saying "with great power comes great responsibility." So it seems like Stan Lee or Marvel or just Spider-Man in general one-upped a very historic individual. But jumping into the film, we get introduced to two young Mormon missionaries who are sent to follow up on a list of people who have expressed interest on a point or another for the Mormon religion. The two are first depicted sitting on a bench at a park, conversing about common lies that they were told throughout society. The most amusing of it all is that they're actually arguing whether or not Magnum condoms are meant for larger penises, or peni. I don't know what the plural of penis is. The two have a chuckle and decide to get back to work afterwards. I think Paxton is arguing that there is no difference, while Barnes is arguing that there is a huge difference. The conversation then leads to Paxton admitting that she was watching like amateur pornography at one point, and she pronounces it in a really funny way. It's like pornography, I think. And Barnes kind of picks up on it and pokes fun at her for watching it in general. But the two of them kind of circle back to their main subject, or the main reason why they're out and about to begin with, which is spreading the word of God, if you will, and trying to bring back converts. So once they're done with their cute little conversation, if you will, the duo are shown struggling across town to meet the list of people that have been assigned to them to try and convert. Along the way, they see a bunch of people crossing streets, the sidewalks, and try to strike up conversation with them in attempts to convert. One group of people that they make note of is a group of young teenagers who seem to be taking photos and videos in the middle of the street. Paxton is portrayed as being a very naive and very pure individual. So when she comes across these girls, she says, and I quote, "Wow, I immediately love these girls." And the teenagers end up getting honked at by this car in the street. They run over to Paxton and Bard's side of the sidewalk, and this very same girl, the leader of the group, if you will, asks to take a photo with her and Paxton, and then says, and I quote, "Is it true that you guys wear magic underwear?" and pulls down her skirt. And Paxton is shown wearing a unique scent of undergarments, if you will. Paxton is completely broken down by this, and then I think this gives Barnes like the motive to try and really make Paxton's day. The two of them seem close, but at the same time not. I don't know how long they've known each other or how long they've been friends. We actually don't find that out throughout the movie, but you can tell that the two of them shared a bond. Don't know how deep it runs though. It's around this point where we come to find out Sister Paxton hasn't had any people convert over to Mormonism, while Sister Barnes has had about 8 or 9 people. And Paxton is still very insecure about still not converting even one person over yet. So the two missionaries, well, specifically Barnes, really takes it upon herself to try and get Paxton a convert by the end of this endeavor, if you will. The two of them go through their list. They try and stop as many people as they can on the streets and along the way, and nobody will give them the time of day up until they reach to their final house. So Sister Barnes takes the time to lock up the missionaries' bikes onto the gate that's on property of the person they're meeting at last, Mr. Reed. So when walking up to the door, it actually begins to rain pretty hard, almost out of nowhere, because throughout the beginning of the movie, there's a lot of sun. So it seems like the clouds come through almost like abruptly. And by the time, because it starts raining when the girls lock up their bikes onto the gate, by the time they reach Mr. Reed's door, they're drenched in rainwater. So the girls finally make it to the door and knock, but it takes a while before the master of the house opens the door. Mind you, there are a lot of bumps and thuds being heard before the door is even opened. So this causes the audience to be on the lookout for anything suspicious, and you can hope that the girls are also on guard now too, but we're not too sure about it. When the door finally opens and we see Mr. Reed standing by the door, he seems rather friendly and willing to listen to the girls, which is rather refreshing to them since we've literally watched them struggle to connect with even one person during the opening part of the film. The missionaries bring up the idea that Mr. Reed was entertaining becoming a Mormon, and he seems to show a bit of skepticism and hesitancy despite his name being on their list. Sister Paxton then rushes to deliver her lines in hopes of catching Mr. Reed with one of them and having him convert. She was actually practicing the lines that she wanted to deliver to Mr. Reed before he opened the door, which I thought was kind of cute. And I'm pretty sure Sister Barnes did too. So, noticing the rain and the fact that the girls are drenched, Mr. Reed offers for the missionaries to enter his home, so this way they can get out of the rain and warm up as the two talk about their religion some more. The girls make it very clear that they can only enter if another woman, girl, or female is present in the house. I think they even go as far as to say, "Do you have a girl roommate?" before they step in. And the reason why they're invited in is because, like I said, it's raining hard, And you can tell that the girls are starting to get cold with time. However, Mr. Reed keeps asking them questions. So he's intrigued by what these girls have to present, even though he seems to be familiar with the idea of Mormonism altogether. I think Mr. Reed essentially says that, yes, he has a wife, so the girls enter, and the trio get to talking about faith and about what being a Mormon means in general. Mr. Reed is entertaining their idea of religion and seems to be rather knowledgeable on the subject of religion overall. Both Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes notice this and seem very impressed. Like, I think Mr. Reed expresses his knowledge of Mormonism to the girls first before he really talks about other religions or just like religion in general, like the idea of it. So he seems to bring up like a lot of prophets and a lot of founders of the religion that usually isn't common knowledge unless you're a devout. As these exchanges occur, Sister Barnes over time starts to feel suspicious of Mr. Reed. And you can tell based off of like her body language and the way that she's looking around. She's examining the room, and as time passes, you see her notice, and you as an audience member notice, that the windows are much too small for the house itself. The decoration is missing a woman's touch, and that Mr. Reed keeps stalling about the idea of Mrs. Reed joining the trio at any moment in time. This is all happening while Mr. Reed continuously gets up, breaks away, and brings back things like cute little snacks and drinks for the missionaries, like cola, tea, and I think he even offers blueberry pie to the girls. Mr. Reed takes note that the missionaries may not be able to have the drinks due to their inability to drink caffeine. Sister Barnes makes a joke about how they can all drink soda since it was not written in the Holy Book. Sister Paxton takes notice that the smell of the pie is actually blueberry pie that's filling the room, and Mr. Reed mentions that Mrs. Reed is finishing on baking on one. I think around this time, this is where Mr. Reed like pushes the envelope a bit and asks about like the girl's parents, and the conversation turns to Sister Barnes and her father. We come to find out that her father passed due to like a medical condition. I think it's hereditary. I don't remember the name, but Mr. Reed mistakes it for the word blueberry, and he has a chuckle about it. But we see Sister Barnes become physically uncomfortable with not only the joke, but the idea of her father's death being the punchline of the joke. So this is where even a bigger disconnect happens between Barnes and Reed. But Paxton still seems a little oblivious about this whole thing, to a certain extent. This is when Mr. Reed gets up, I think, for the second or third time, and Sister Barnes actually takes the time to turn the candle that has been on the table, and she finds out what scent the candle has. To her surprise, but also not, the candle was releasing the blueberry pie scent, like it's literally labeled blueberry pie. Barnes alerts Paxton of the candle, and we see the two girls start to panic a little bit. Mr. Reed returns and asks the girls a question that's rather interesting. He asks them whether or not they'll feel comfortable about answering said question to begin with, and that's where one of them makes the point that we won't know until you ask us. The missionaries agree to hearing what the question is, and Mr. Reed asks them what is their take on polygamy. Mr. Reed takes note that the Mormons would practice in polygamy and justify it through their faith. He even goes on a tangent about how the man who created Mormonism, or one of the founders, if you will, just did it because he's a horny individual who couldn't keep his dick to himself. Or at least that's the message that Mr. Reed is trying to portray. So he went on and fucked a few other women outside of the marriage that he shared. And in order to make himself look good enough, he brought up the idea of polygamy, so that in the rest of the faith followed. I will give Mr. Reed some credit. He doesn't say it as vulgarly as I do, but that's the gist of the story, that he The founder of Mormonism was very horny, so he just couldn't like keep his junk in his pants and would sleep around with women and got caught cheating. So in order to make sure that, you know, he wouldn't get discredited, he brought up the idea of polygamy, which, I mean, most people aren't necessarily for. The girls are very obviously uncomfortable, and Mr. Reed excuses himself, but not without Sister Barnes, I think, taking the time to really explain how that tradition got dropped in the 1890s. That's not something that they necessarily are proud of or do anymore. And I think even Mr. Reed counters all this by saying, like, no, I know it's not common, but Mormonism isn't known for polygamy because of this. When Mr. Reed leaves again, he actually takes a while to return. And the girls take this as an opportunity to try and leave the house altogether. With the kind of energy that Mr. Reed was giving off, it really was off-putting for them. So this is why they kind of took the initiative to do it. And they even make the pact that they will do their best to leave. Shortly after the pact, this is where Barnes remembers that she placed the key of their bike lock in her coat, which is what Mr. Reed took whenever the girls walked in. He stored them away somewhere. So they can't take their bikes off the gates in order to get back home, or at least back to their church or wherever it is that they're staying at for the time being. The two take the time to kind of debate and argue back and forth, but eventually after a short period of time they agree that it's better to walk into the storm outside and attempt to walk 4 miles in said storm than to stay in the house. And the two of them will just make sure that they make that walk so this way they can get wherever they need to safely. They both feel very unsafe under this roof and don't feel as comfortable as they did when they first walked in, and understandably so. Now comes the time where they try to leave. Both girls try to get the main door open, the front door open, but it won't budge. Paxton tries first, and Barnes tries shortly after, almost in an impatient manner, and they notice that the door won't budge at all. Not the handle, nor the hinges. When Mr. Reed finally returns, the girl muster up the courage to ask him if they can leave, and Mr. Reed informs them that they can leave whenever they want. It'll just have to be either with the back door or the front door. If they choose to leave through the front door, then they'll have to wait until the timer resets itself, and this way the door is able to open. They cannot open the door prior to the timer resetting itself. Mr. Reed doesn't even attempt to sit down. He just walks off and tells the girls that they can join him in order to be able to leave the household. The girls are very shaken up, to say the least, and try to think of another way to leave the house, but can't come up with anything at all. So any idea shot up is immediately shot down by the other, and the tension of the movie has been building a lot up to this point, and you can tell that it's going to reach its peak very soon. It's actually rather astounding how much tension this film has, and does a good job of building all together. It's hard to really want to look away from the screen because Mr. Reed tells a story differently on his face than what he does coming out of his mouth. So if you're not looking at the screen, the kind of tone that he has and what he's saying doesn't seem as extreme. But if you are able to look at the screen, his facial expressions and the way that he says certain things lets you know that what he's saying has 4 or 5 different layers to it. It's very complex. And I mean, when the girls finally join Mr. Reed in the room, they're shaking with fear. So it's not just me and you, the audience members who are watching this movie, who feel uncomfortable. It's even the main characters. So Sister Paxton asked Mr. Reed if the girls can just see Mrs. Reed. So this way they know that they're not in violation of their religion and that a woman is present in the house with them. It's now Mr. Reed's turn to go off and talk about the idea of religion after Paxton asks which door would Mr. Reed choose to leave through to get to the back of the house. So when Paxton asks about Mrs. Reed, Mr. Reed says, and I quote, "I will open this door if you believe Mrs. Reed is on the other side of it. If not, then what's the point of me opening the door to prove to you that nobody's behind there?" It almost seems like Reed is trying to challenge Paxton's belief. He even goes so far as to say, like, if you truly believe it, then I'll open the door. If you truly believe it, then my wife will be there, and I will actually have a slice of pie waiting for you, versus the candle that you saw, or the drinks that you saw, or everything else that has been pointing you in the direction that what I'm saying is false. So Reed is very much trying to drill into Paxton's head that what she believes is what she deems to be true. And this kind of feeds into what Reed is building up to in this interaction at the very least. And I give Hugh huge applause, because the way that he's able to portray the character Mr. Reed and his obsession with the idea of religion altogether is amazing. So Mr. Reed goes on a speech about how he's been able to find the one true religion, and that he actually never really meant to find it. What started off as a curiosity turned into a lifetime obsession of understanding where religion comes from and how the idea of Christ came to be. Mr. Reed even goes as far as to insult the Mormon religion by making a comparison of the religion to monopoly. It's not just Mormonism that he insults, by the way, it's all religion. In Mr. Reed's eyes, all major religions, or what he calls the big three, are iterations of the original text that has been passed down for centuries. Mr. Reed's argument is that all religion, whether they're pagan or Abrahamic, are all iterations of the same text. He even goes so far as to say that the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran are all just the same text said in different words. I think he even makes a comparison to like Buddhism and even Hinduism, where in like ancient Egyptian religion, where all of them had a mother figure who was a virgin giving birth to another individual who is of a higher caliber spiritually, and this being has a destiny that's meant to benefit man for a certain period of time. It's really interesting the way that he words it, and seeing the way that Mr. Reed kind of lectures about this stuff on screen, I was hooked. And that's mainly because of the fact that me as an individual, I was very explorative with the concept of religion whenever I was younger, because while I was raised in a Muslim household, my parents would take me to Bible study camp so this way I could get affiliated with the idea of God. I also had a lot of like Judas friends. I never really went to temple, but they did take the time to teach me exactly how their religion worked. I would visit Hindu temples. I have yet to visit a Buddhist temple, but at least in the States, I did in Japan. But all in all, I've always found it very intriguing, the different branches and how similar they all are. And Mr. Reed does a very, very good job of like bringing that to life as well on the big screen. But me being fascinated is completely different than Paxton and Barnes, because at this point they're fucking panicking and they're trying their best to keep calm while listening to the man insult their religion and the concept of religion altogether. I think Mr. Reed even tells the girls over and over and over again during this entire exchange that they're free to leave through the back door of the house at any time they choose. They just need to pick a door. So when Paxton and Barnes walk into this new room, it's more well lit and there's more life to the room, if you will. There's like different pictures, different like artwork that it's framed and all around the walls. The walls actually have color. They're not like a neutral wallpaper. The furniture has its own character, and you can see Mr. Reed's personality almost like sleeping through the walls. And there's two doors in this room. One of the doors is painted green while the other one is painted purple, and they're on either side of his desk. And it's a big like mahogany wood desk. The girls need to pick which one. Now this is where Paxton's question comes into play. She asks Mr. Reed which door would he pick, and then that's where he goes on that tangent on what is religion altogether. So he then picks up a piece of chalk at the end of his lecture, for lack of better words, and writes down the phrase belief and disbelief on each of the doors. And he tells the girls that it's up to them now to choose which door they're going to go through to determine their outcome at the very end. Barnes waits for Reed to finish his lecture and even takes the time to talk back to him. She says that she feels very sorry for Mr. Reed and that she will stay devout to her religion. And the reason why Barnes reacts the way that she does is because Paxton is actually afraid, crying, and shaking, about to walk through the disbelief door, but Barnes is saying, and I quote, "No, I'm going to stay true to my religion till the very end, even if it means my demise, just so this way I know that I stayed on the right path all in all." She convinces Paxton to come back to the belief door, and the two of them walk through that. And she even looks to Mr. Reed and says that she feels sorry for him, that his endless years of research, he'll still be an empty shell of a man that doesn't really know what his form of faith is, which is a very interesting way of dissing a person. I'm not gonna lie. Like I said, Paxton takes a completely different approach. She keeps thanking Mr. Reed from the end of the lecture, that she's thankful for his kind words and that she'll be sure to use them in her decision making moving forward. She seems to be pushing Barnes to walk through the disbelief door, while Barnes is very much saying that she's gonna stick to believing in God, if you will, and her version of God. It doesn't matter what Mr. Reed says. So when Paxton finally walks over to Barnes' side and they walk through the door marked belief, the two missionaries are greeted with a dark basement with no lights. They make it down the stairs to the lobby of the room, if you will. It's like a cement floor with a metal chair and metal table. But I have no other way of describing this area, so I guess basement, but with no shelves. So I'm just going to say lobby. The girls can hear Mr. Reed making an announcement in this new room about how the miracle they're about to witness in this room is a miracle very similar to the ones that they see in their cherished books. But the girls first try and figure out if there's a way out of this room. The doors that they just entered from moments ago have been locked, and there's no other way to leave. I think they try both hallways, and both hallways lead to a set of doors that are locked. The girls regroup in the lobby once more and try and leave through a ventilation system that they see in the room. They use the chair and the table, and Barnes climbs off of it, on it, tries to open a passageway through the ventilation system, but they fail due to the prophet that Mr. Reed claims to have coming into the room, getting ready to eat a blueberry pie. So Mr. Reed gets back on the announcement machine and says that the pie is laced with a few different toxic herbs that will kill the prophet, and she'll awaken once more within a few moments of time after eating the poison pastry. And during this whole lecture, or at least around the very end, the doorbell rings and the fire alarm goes off in the house, alerting both the girls and the wicked homeowner that someone's at the door. I think the prophet has already eaten the blueberry pie at this point, and the girls are freaking out that they're near a dead body. So the doorbell ringing brings them that sense of relief, or at least breaks them away from the tension that Mr. Reed is building up to. The girls then make a run for the doors in hopes of getting a peek at who could be at the door ringing the doorbells, and maybe they could even help the girls. They overhear that it's their elder, or at least make out the voice that it could be their elder, to come and check and see if the missionaries had visited Mr. Reed, and they call out for him. They actually yell out for him, but what they don't know is that even though they can hear the elder can't hear them, due to the lecture room and the basement being mostly soundproof, or at least I think the lecture room, not the basement area. So once Mr. Reed is able to convince the elder that the girls did not visit him, even though they're right there in his basement, he turns back so this way he can talk to the girls once more. The doorbell rings again, I want to say not even a couple minutes later, and the elder tells Mr. Reed that he wouldn't be a proper devout individual if he didn't try and hand off a pamphlet of his communion. I think the girls understand that at this point no one can really help them, so Barnes takes the initiative of trying to get a box of matches that fell on the floor earlier over to her so she can use it while they're downstairs in the basement area. She gets Paxton to help her pull this rollout rug to the crack of the door, so this way they can keep pulling the fabric down and try and get to the box of matches since it was so far away. I think Barnes is able to get the match up to the crack of the door, but is not able to get it through the crack because the box is a little bigger. So Barnes then resorts to trying to get the matches themselves instead of the box entirely, and is successful in doing so. The only thing is there's a lot of tension being built in the scene because this is all occurring around the peak of the conversation between the elder and Reed. And when Reed walks away for the first time, the elder rings the doorbell. Reed goes back to answer it. The two of them talk about the pamphlet. And then Barnes is still meddling around with the box. Shortly after, the door closes for the second time. And Barnes still hasn't fully gotten all the matches out, or at least as many matches out as she'd like. So you know and can hear Mr. Reed coming back to the room, and you're unsure of how he'll react seeing the girls attempt to escape. Because some people who hold others hostage whenever they try to escape, they take it offensively. So at least for me, I was ready for this man to lash out. So when the girls are finally successful in getting the matchsticks that they need, they run back to the lobby of the basement where the prophet had just died, and Paxton takes notice of something. She sees that the prophet is not in the exact same position as she was when she first passed away. So I guess the head of the prophet was positioned differently than how she is seeing it right now in front of her. Barnes writes it off as Paxton remembering how the prophet was positioned differently than how it's really like, but Paxton keeps persisting that the prophet wasn't laying down the way that she is now. The prophet comes to and tells the girls that she saw the afterlife. They're in really broken sentences, essentially saying that there's no heaven, just clouds, and the fact that someone was holding on to her and pulling her back to her body, and that none of it was real. Mr. Reed then enters the room and ends up escorting the prophet out while consoling her, and the girls are just in complete shock. Barnes confronts Mr. Reed and tells him that she doesn't believe in the show that he's putting on, that it's all just a show for him to justify his way of belief. And the movie then cuts to Barnes looking at Paxton standing behind Mr. Reed and building up to what she's going to use for the go phrase that the two of them made a pact on earlier, which is magic underwear. And magic underwear meant that Paxton was going to stab Mr. Reed with the letter opener that Barnes stole from the lecture room earlier in the film. So we hear the slicing of flesh before it finally registers, and the pattering of blood onto the floor before we know who got cut first. But the audience members, along with Paxton and Barnes, are shocked to see that Barnes is the one who has the slit throat. At first, I thought maybe Paxton finally gave in and is willing to feed into Mr. Reed's idea of religion in hopes of getting out. But we come to find out my headcanon was completely incorrect. Mr. Reed himself kills Barnes with a box cutter, and Barnes is just, for now at least, bleeding out. Mr. Reed then cuts into Barnes's arm as, she's fallen down to the floor, and finds a metal piece in there. She calls Barnes a program and says that she will not be able to come back to life from the afterlife like how all the other people he's killed in the past. Paxton is at her breaking point and ends up looking to Mr. Reed in utter shock and hatred. Mr. Reed keeps asking Paxton if she knew Barnes had a contraceptive implant in her and that what their faith would think of this. I think Paxton brings up the argument that that middle piece is not a programming chip, it's just a contraceptive. So then Mr. Reed then tells her, okay, well, what do you think the communion will think? And Paxton gives a very honest and transparent answer. She then goes on a rant herself by saying that everything that he's done is a way of trying to get her to abandon her faith, up until this point. And she mentions how the body of the prophet was moved, and that the first body did actually die, but the second one was somebody pretending to be the original prophet. She just didn't know how the bodies were switched out yet. Paxton also says that the prophet was given a script to utter when she came back to life, quote unquote, but the actress went off script by using the phrase, "it is not real," as a way to alert the girls of what's transpiring in the house. Paxton does one more thing and surprises the homeowner and myself included, and she says that Mr. Reed wants her to believe that the only reason why she is the one who is alive and standing is not Barnes' doing, it's actually Mr. Reed. He wanted to end up this way. So it was the entire plan of Barnes being put off and Paxton being the one who makes it in the end, at least for now. So Paxton also confides to Mr. Reed about prayer study, and a very specific prayer study done a while back to demonstrate whether or not prayer has a real effect on the human body. Paxton tells Mr. Reed that the study came back that prayer actually does nothing to benefit the person you're praying for, and that the study debunks the idea that prayer having any form of power at all, at least on a scientific level. She also adds that she still chooses to believe in her faith because faith can get people far and she will always remain devout. Paxton ends up underground once more, and we see Barnes still splayed out in the floor with her own blood. I think after this lecture, Paxton ends up running through the house trying to find an escape. Doesn't really do well. It's either before this or after this. I'm a little sketchy on the timeline, but I'm pretty sure it's after this because she is still underground, still very near Barnes, but she builds up to a point to where she stabs Reeds with the letter opener and starts running through the house. Okay, so I guess it's after. But before the stabbing occurs, Paxton even tells Mr. Reed that she finally picked up on the message that he's been trying to portray this entire time, ever since he really showed his true colors, that religion is just a form of control. Reed then smiles and corners Paxton. So around this time, this is when Paxton ends up stabbing Mr. Reed in the neck with the letter opener, and she starts running through the house. She tries to look for a way out, and she's successful by finding a secret side door in the hallway where the staircases were that led down to the basement. But she can't really get out of the house. She ends up running in a circle somehow back to the door that she ran out of, and Mr. Reed's waiting for her and ends up stabbing her in the stomach with the same box cutter that was used to slice Barnes's throat. So Paxton and Reed have their final showdown in the lobby of the basement, and right when it seems that Reed is about to be the one to walk away, at least kinda, from this semi-alive, from this weird encounter, if you will, Barnes ends up swinging a piece of wood with nails on it at Reed, causing him to fall back. You hear the squelch of flesh, you hear the blood dropping, but you don't know who really got hit until the camera pans to Reed and you see that wooden plank that Barnes used to swing implanted in his head or in his chest, one of the two. You see Reed then falls back from the impact and ends up bleeding out more and completely dies. Paxton is surprised by Barnes even being able to move one last time, and the move that she makes is to protect Paxton herself. You see this poor lone missionary grieve for her fellow sister passing, but doesn't take the time to waste the opportunity. She continues down the house. There's a trapdoor underneath where the table was, and walks through that to find the lock used for her and Barnes's bike on the final door handle. Paxton reaches in her pocket to see if she still has the key to unlock the bike lock, and she ends up finding it. We come to find out that Mr. Reed had had taken out the bikes, I guess, and then put the lock on the door handles, but mistakenly put the key in the wrong coat. So that was one thing that alerted Barnes while she was still alive that something could be wrong in the situation that her and Paxton are in. Paxton then unlocks the door and walks out to be greeted by the storm. Before Paxton takes off, though, there's a butterfly that flies down amidst the snowstorm and lands on her finger. The significance of this is that in the beginning of the movie and in the beginning of the exchange with Mr. Reed, Paxton confides to him and to Barnes that she would like to come back as a butterfly and land on her loved one's hands to let them know that she's watching over them. So this is where your interpretation can come into play. Either Paxton really made it out alive, and this is Barnes's way of showing that she is checking in on Paxton, or Paxton didn't make it and she's having an out-of-body experience. It's going to be one of the two, and obviously it's up to you. I don't know if this movie meant to have a fully symbolic ending, but I'm taking it as a symbolic ending. And in all honesty, I actually really liked this movie. Now, I don't consider Heretic to be a horror film. I do consider it to be a thriller, so like a horror thriller, but more on the thriller side. And I think MJ feels the same way that I do. If anything, he's more so geared towards the thriller part. Because don't get me wrong, the tension is very much there. You're very much waiting for the final shoe to drop. When you come to find out that the door for belief and disbelief actually led to the same spot in the basement, it was a pretty extreme reveal. But I don't feel like the movie carried the kind of fear and caliber that was ingrained in us whenever I was watching the trailers for this film. So I was under the impression, and MJ was too, that this movie was going to be like a new gen Saw. Not going to say torture porn, but I kind of thought there would be more gore involved. But all in all, I still really liked the film. And I'm partially biased because I also have always liked the idea of talking about religion, not just the Abrahamic religion, but all religions altogether, the commonalities, the differences, things like that. So seeing an antagonist express the kind of interest that I've always had and summarizing everything that I took the time to learn, both at a young age and when I got older, in ways that's easy to digest for anybody who's watching this movie, at least, was rather intriguing. Now, I don't have the same mindset as him. I do believe there is a force out there. You can call it whatever you want, but I definitely am not an atheist. I call it the universe, I guess. And I do believe that everybody has their own interpretation of this higher power, if you will. But that's just my idea and my concept. I can sit here forever and talk about Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, like Muslim or Islam, and Christianity or Wicca or any other kind of religion that you can name out there. So I'll sit there and I can talk to you for ages about it. But instead of doing that, I feel like this movie had a decent marriage between the two of like talking about religion but not making it too political, but also at the same time keeping that like thriller aspect to it. I just didn't really see this movie as a horror film, but the tension that builds throughout the movie is very similar to horror. So that's why I give it like a thriller horror vibe, if you will. But this movie, I enjoyed it. I think I could definitely sit back and watch it again and find new things within it, which is something that I personally enjoy in a film. So I would give it, at least with my first watch, like a 7. I don't know what rating MJ would give, but I do know he stands on the same like boat as I do, which is this movie is not a full thriller film or a full horror film. It's more of a thriller film, but it doesn't mean that it's not an enjoyable film. So you guys let me know. If you have watched Heretic, let me know what you thought of the film. Did you like it? Did you not? Did you think it was a horror film, or do you think it's more of a thriller like how me and MJ do? Who knows? Maybe we're just fucking jaded and like screwed in the head from all the fucking horror films that we've been watching. Doubt it, but who knows? I mean, maybe you thought the movie was really good, and that it was petrifying from start to finish. Like, horror is very subjective, so let me know what you thought. If you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on Instagram. I am going to be posting there almost every single day, everything like horror related, and you guys will even get like behind the scene looks of like how we do the episodes, how we take notes, how we do research, things along those lines. So this way you can see what gets put into the production of these episodes, along with just our love for horror altogether. We also have TikTok, we also have Blue Sky, we also have X or Twitter, but I'm currently mainly managing Instagram, so I'd love to also see you guys on there. But otherwise, that's it from me. Hopefully MJ will be here on the next episode, and we'll both talk about all next time. Bye.